everybody. Welcome to our Let's Talk series by Ibisami Relational Health. I'm Dr. Christiana Awosan, the owner of Ibisami Relational Health and also the senior supervisor, clinical supervisor at Ibisami Relational Health. Today, we have some incredible gentlemen who are here with us today for our Let's Talk series. And since June is Men's Mental Health Month, and we just thought it would be great for the two of them to come talk to us a bit about this topic. And so our topic today basically looks at beyond the paycheck, coping with provider pressure and providing pro providing. Sorry, let me start all over again. All right, I'm going to start with our topic today basically speaks to beyond the paycheck, coping with provider pressure and protecting your mental health. So our two clinicians, Neil and Joseph, who are going to introduce themselves, are going to speaking to us today about this important topic that is related to like men's mental health. So welcome, Neil and Joseph.
Thank you for having us. My name is Neil Mitchell. I am a licensed associate marriage and family therapist with Ibismi Relational Health. I've been with the practice for approximately 3 years now.
Yes, and my name is Joseph Bruno. I am a limited permit holder at MFT at Obesity Relational Health, and I'm glad to be on the team. Glad to be a part of this show.
Thank you. Thank you. And yes, Neil, it's been 3 years. You started with us as an intern, and it seems like it goes by really quickly. So I really appreciate you two being here. So we've talked about this topic actually a lot in supervision, right?
Mhm.
Particularly when it comes to Black men. And just this month's been one that we celebrate and we make aware Black men's mental health and just men in general, mental health. So I have some topics for you all to like, maybe even before we start, just really quickly, what's your sense of this topic in general? As like we read the topic, like what's your understanding of it? How does it show up in the work that you do with men?
Okay. Well, for me, I noticed that men have a lot of learning about themselves that they have to do.
Mm,
Men typically have not been socialized to really dig that much into their own feelings or their own emotions about a variety of topics. So
hmm.
I find that I typically have to introduce them to themselves.
Makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, and piggybacking off what Neil said, it's taboo in the society, right? Of just
Hmm.
what being a man is and how you show up as a man. And I think this
Hmm.
topic is really important on just helping men getting an understanding of what mental health really is and
Yeah.
how it affects us as men.
Yeah, definitely. I appreciate you two saying that because I know, I mean, there's this whole thing around therapy and people coming to therapy in general. And we've always known like it's usually women that are like coming to therapy, going to therapy. And usually when men do come to therapy, it's usually the women in their life that's like pushing them to come to therapy. And we've seen that most of the time. That's usually the wife, the girlfriend, the partner, the mom, the sister, the cousins were like, or even the friend that's like, you need therapy, and they're calling for the men. And we've also seen in like recent years, increasingly more men taking that initiative by themselves as well, which is great. So one of my first question for you guys is, what does being a provider mean to you personally, and where did you come to have that belief? Because I know that's one of the things that men talk about a lot, like being a provider. And if you all can also speak to how it shows up in the work you do.
Okay. Um, I would like to get to that, but I also wanted to add on to what you were saying before that
Mhm.
it is also typically women that are therapists, at least in my
Mhm.
experience. So
Right.
it opens up the door when you have male therapists because
Mhm.
maybe men feel that there's a little bit more comfort in being able to talk to another man instead of having the women push them into therapy and then they're going to talk to another woman as a
Mhm.
therapist. So
Mhm. Mhm.
um,
Good point.
I'll let Joseph handle the first question first.
Thank you, Neil. Um, so being a provider, from my understanding, is really providing that whatever that need and or want is by a particular individual, right? Whether it be safety, like yeah, safety protection, food,
Mhm.
education, intimacy,
Mhm.
knowledge, all the above uh,
Mhm.
is how I would, understanding or how I would define a provider. And I guess I learned it at an early age with, mom and dad, where they didn't, tell me exactly what a provider is, right? But just seeing how they showed up at home is like, oh, I'm hungry. Here's food. I need new sneakers.
Mhm.
Here you go, right? And just getting that concept and understanding of this is what it means to provide for someone, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
So I would say really in early childhood, I think I got an understanding of what it means to really provide. And as I
Mhm.
gotten older, obviously that narrative kind of shifted where it's not this one thing, but
Mhm.
the, a variety of things.
Okay. Makes sense.
Okay. Um, I would also like to say that I agree, of course, with Joseph. Um, and I find that for a lot of men these days, especially maybe some that were around my age, perhaps, we learned what being a provider is from our parents or, from how we were raised. And the male um, part in that has somewhat shifted over time, I believe. To me now, it's being a provider is more being a not only a supporter but also a team player,
Mm.
partner. Um, so it is not just incumbent upon the man to provide shelter, food, and protection.
Mhm.
It is also incumbent upon him to be a team player because um, the man is not the only one with the paycheck nowadays. The man is not the only source of financial stability and income. So
Mhm.
we somewhat, I find, and when I talk to people, that we have to kind of reconfigure what this idea of being a provider is and expand it a little bit more for men so that they can feel more included and they
Mhm.
can also be flexible in their definition of themselves within a relationship.
Mm. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you both for sharing that. And I'm wondering, like, how everything that you all just said, how does that show up in the work that you all are doing with some of the men that you're working with in therapy?
Well, in my experience, I would say a lot of men are very apprehensive in the sense of this is how I identify, this is what I do. Anything else is really, irrelevant because I am providing the shelter, I am paying the bills, I am doing these things. So to show up in an emotional way doesn't make sense to me because as I'm providing, that should include the emotional aspect because it shows that I care, right? If I didn't care, I wouldn't be paying these bills. Is what I receive from a lot of my
Mm.
clients, and it's interesting. The wife, the partner would then have a request of I need more,
Mhm.
and then usually the man would say, "This is as much as I'm doing. You don't, I'm not appreciated." And it flows to a different conversation of what being appreciated means and what does it look like.
Yeah.
Okay. I see that happen a lot also. And I just like to add to that. Um, for a lot of men that I encounter, it also makes them feel as though they cannot ask for help.
Mm-hmm.
That somehow, if they do ask for help, then they are not quite living up to their gender role or their identity of them as a provider.
Mm.
Men are somewhat taught that we have to provide and we have to do it on our own. And if we cannot figure that out, then somehow we are a failure as providers.
Right.
Mm.
So, and that's when it comes back to being a partnership more than, very specific gender roles in which the lines cannot be crossed and blurred with,
Right.
say, men providing emotional support.
Right. Right. So it sounds to me that with what you are saying, right, from a very young age, boys, men are taught that their value is tied to earning.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Right.
Yes.
And it seems like from what you are saying that this is something that you all have experienced and that you're also hearing from the men that you're working with, right?
Yes.
And it sounds like because of that, we can also, we know in terms of our theories, like then that means like society have trained men, socialized men to tie their identity to being a provider. And it seems to be something that is difficult for men to not only see themselves as just provider, but to also see themselves as partners, right? Because
Hmm.
that identity is not just the only identity you have. So for you in your own sense, right? Um, how early were you taught to tie your value to what you're earning, and how did you all like individually did you internalize that, and when did you stop internalizing that, if you don't mind sharing?
Okay. I would just say for me personally, I never tied my worth to my earnings.
Yes.
Um, my parents started the transition to women earning more in the relationship and to
Mhm.
husbands being partners a lot earlier than now. So
Right.
I did
That's
not
good.
grow up with that, you know, this idea that my worth or my um, as a partner would be tied to my earnings.
Yeah, that's good.
Um, my experience, has been different because growing up, right, in the Black culture, there was this sense of um, how much you earn is basically who you are, right?
Mm,
Growing up in early 90s, not having the name brand sneakers or,
mm-hmm,
or
mm-hmm,
the clothes of what you speak, you were
mm-hmm,
considered as poor, right?
mm-hmm,
And so that played a lot in my psyche as I grew up. Like, all right, so then that means I need to earn money. And if I earn
mm,
money, then I have this type of social status, which means that
mm,
I need to fit the part in how I dress, right?
mm-hmm,
And as I got
mm-hmm,
older, just understanding, all right, I got to figure a way to
mm-hmm,
make
mm-hmm,
more so
mm-hmm.
that I can be looked at as a certain, fit a certain role and fit in a certain part.
Yeah.
That played a lot again with the way I showed up in every aspect of my life and affected a
Mm-hmm.
lot of my relationships.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that because I remember like also growing up in the 90s and also as I got older and was more interested in like dating and researching like dating and coupling. When you ask heterosexual women, what do they want in a partner? They're like, oh, I want a man who's able to provide.
Mm-hmm.
And when they say provide, they mean provide financially, right? And so it's like all around us, even the music that we hear, right? Even all the dating
Right.
shows and scene is always like, in order to find the mate, the mate has to be a provider. So it's like ingrained in the identity of not only men, but also women, right? Heterosexual women and just women in general, right?
Right.
Everybody,
Right.
regardless of whether you're same-sex or heterosexual, that the job of a man is to provide financially,
Right.
right? And so from a very young age, even like you were saying, where the music, the the way you dress, right? The way you show up with your friends, it's like you have to be a provider as a man. And it's
Right.
like that's what your worth is tied to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That is very challenging. And I think we got a lot of that message. I mean, we always get a lot of that message, but I remember growing up in the 90s too, like 90s and early 2000. It was a lot.
Right. Right.
So this brings me to like a other question that kind of focus on the mental, emotional, and relational cost of this for men, right? So how does this pressure to provide affects men's mental, emotional, and relational health and well-being?
Well, I would say, as I said before, that in what we've been saying,
Mm-hmm.
we tie our ability to provide to our worth or our value as men.
Mm,
and I don't mean that necessarily as men in relationships. I mean that as men as representative of our gender and our
mm-hmm,
roles as
mm-hmm,
the male species. Um, so it's interesting because women have are enjoying a resurgence of, to a large degree, self-worth and
mm-hmm,
value, and that is coming, well, not necessarily into conflict, but everybody is trying to, I believe, reconfigure how they see themselves.
mm-hmm,
And for women that are, earning as much, if not more, than men, taking on more responsibilities for themselves and for their
mm-hmm,
families.
mm-hmm.
Um, for the male that is not flexible, or for the male who ties his self worth to being able to provide certain things,
Right.
if the wife is able to do that and she does not necessarily need him and she needs more of a partner, then I believe that is very challenging for a lot
Mm-hmm,
of men,
mm-hmm,
which
mm-hmm.
can show up in many different ways.
Yeah.
Right. And just to piggyback off of that,
Mm-hmm,
you know, this sense of again being the provider, right? It's when that narrative is shift and there's no communication and we're not talking about this, then it begins to distort what reality truthfully is, right? Where I have to be a provider or that's it, right? And it can
mm-hmm,
affect again what you're saying, Neil. It can affect on how you show up for yourself, right?
mm-hmm,
Because I've dealt with clients where they're really hard on themselves for not being able to, hey, I got to pay the mortgage. I don't need her help. I need to show her that I'm the
mm-hmm,
man, that I can do this. When,
mm-hmm,
it's really, like you said, this partnership, right? We're in this together. But a
mm-hmm,
lot of men take it as this is me and everyone else is here and I have to fit that mold. And if not, then somehow it makes me less than of what I'm supposed to be.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. To that sense of feeling inadequate,
Mm-hmm.
right? Going back to what we're talking about, right? In terms of what I hear you're describing is this feeling of inadequacy that men feels, right? In terms of not having to fully embody that label of being a provider. And that not only harms men in terms of their own relationship to themselves emotionally and mentally, because then it creates this narrow focus on this is who I am and this is all I am. And
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't allow them to expand their view of there are other ways to be a provider. It doesn't only mean that I have to be able to provide financially, pay the mortgage, buy this, buy that. I can also be a provider in a different way. So, because it harms them, they feel inadequate, then it
Mm-hmm.
also harms them in their relationships, whether it is with their partners or with any other persons in their life, because there's this narrow focus of all I am is a provider, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And,
And I would just like,
mhm.
I was
Go
just gonna
ahead.
say, I'd just like to expand that to be like, not only is that it challenges their idea of who they are as a provider, but also a quote unquote real man, because
Mm,
we have this idea or definition of what a real man is and what a
right,
real man does,
right.
and it is financial, but tends to be not emotional.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah,
Great point. Yeah.
yeah. And I think that also brings this sense of what I will call rigidity of identity,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which is like having this rigid view of who I am. And we know, like, if we have a rigid view, then that's where you start having a distorted notion of who you are
Mm-hmm.
and how you show up in relationship, whether it's with yourself or with other people, right? And then there's no space to fully be yourself because you're only fulfilling this single role, right?
Right, right.
Um, and so I guess my question then is, where men will struggle with this in the work that you all do with them in therapy, how do you all help them shift that rigidity of identity? What do you all do to help them start to have an expanded view of self, an expanded identity of self in order to be able to have a better relationship to themselves and others in their life?
Right. So what I what I've done and what I'm doing is really exploring their understanding of what emotions are, right, and their relationship to it. Can they identify it? How does it show up for them? What are they
Mm-hmm.
feeling? Where do they feel it?
Mm-hmm.
Kind of also, are there examples in their lives, that share that message to them that kind of constructed that idea of this is what a man is. Is there anyone they look up to that's the opposite of what they know, right? Are there
Mm-hmm.
any actors, musicians, whatever it may be, that
Mm-hmm.
kind of show different sides of that? And how do
Mm-hmm.
they define that, right?
Mm-hmm.
What does it look like for you if you then show up opposite of what you believe?
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of do that kind of work with them, more of the
Mm-hmm.
internal, internalizing and understanding of who are you? How do you
Mm-hmm.
show up?
Mm-hmm.
Are we
Mm-hmm.
paying attention to how others perceive you, which then kind of, affects the way in which you show up and how you
Mm-hmm.
walk. So those are
Mm-hmm.
kind of the basic things that I kind of do with most of my men clients.
Mm. I appreciate that. I appreciate what you're saying because I think what you're trying to do, and correct me if I'm wrong, is okay, fine, we acknowledge because I mean, you still gotta put food on the table. You still gotta pay the rent, right? You still gotta
Right.
pay the mortgage. You have to send the kids to school and all that stuff. Acknowledging that, yes, this is a road that you are in and
Mm-hmm.
you've taken on, and at the same time helping them to see that that's not the only role. So you're asking for other alternatives. What are other ways in which others in your life view you? And what are other ways that you've seen other men, whether it is in your personal life or in social media or media, not social media, just in society in general, actually perform this role of being a man and being a provider. So I kind of like that. So like contrasting that for them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just to touch point on what you're saying, also letting them know it's okay if they don't know, right?
Mm,
That's a great starting point of not.
yeah.
So let's
Yeah.
figure it out together. What do you,
Mm,
or what? How would you like it to look, right?
mm-hmm,
How would you
mm-hmm,
like to show up emotionally? What would that look like for you,
mm-hmm,
right?
mm-hmm.
And to start beginning to process it with them and letting them know that hey, it's okay. It's okay if a man cries. It's okay
Mm-hmm.
if a man says, "Hey, I'm scared. I don't
Mm-hmm.
know. I need help," and kind of like normalizing that for them, so that
Yeah.
they can open up this window and open up more conversation around mental health.
Yeah. I appreciate that.
Yes. I think I tend to go back a little bit into one of your questions earlier. Where did they learn this idea from?
Mm,
Um, and I would go back even further, or not even further, but along the same lines. Like a lot of men that I meet, they have ideas of how they want to show up as fathers,
mm,
right?
mm-hmm.
And sometimes those ideas come from, I want to show up in a way for my children that my father did not show up for me.
Right,
Mm,
right.
And
mm-hmm.
this is usually because the father embraced, because of, where everything was during the time that they were growing up, he
Yeah.
embraced this idea that men are supposed to be financially the provider, and the woman does the nurturing, or
Mm,
the woman tends to the more emotional aspects of the children.
Mm-hmm.
mm-hmm.
So a lot of these men, they grow up and they're like, I wanted my father to be there. I wanted my father to be able, I wanted to talk to him about
Right.
things that I didn't feel comfortable talking to my mother about.
Right.
So I just asked him, well, if this is what you found out that you wanted, that you wish you could have had from your father growing up, and this is what you want to do for your own children, then lean into that and acknowledge or realize that you do need to shift a little bit your identity, or how you feel you are going to be a provider, so that you can tackle both the emotional side and the protective, shelter, food provider side.
Yeah. Now, I appreciate you saying that. That
Right.
is so true. Because most of the time, and all of us do this, right? We're like, I don't want to be like name the parent. But in this
Mm-hmm.
case, we're talking about
Mm-hmm.
father, we're talking about dad. I don't want to be like my dad. And so they move away from that, but forgetting that they're still invisibly connected to the dad,
Right,
right?
right.
They're
Mm-hmm.
still carrying the burden of the dad. If we think about contextual family therapy theory, right? It talks about invisible loyalty,
Mm-hmm.
right? That even if they don't want to be connected to how their dad raised them because it wasn't helpful for them, and they really want to do something different in their own life, right? But it's also hard when you don't acknowledge the fact that, well, dad did it the way he did it because that's all he knew. That's all the template he knew how to. And so being able to, like you're saying, Neil, being able to acknowledge that with them, that, hey, dad basically he was off working off of the template that he knew. He had nothing, not to excuse it, but to just really acknowledge that it's hard. And so you just moving away from it is not going to help you. You have to look at it first to see the reasons why and how you fell into the same thing. And how can we together, as Joseph, you were saying, co-create something different that actually works for you.
Mhm.
Yeah. No, I
True indeed.
appreciate that. Go ahead. What did you say, Neil?
No, I said true indeed.
Yeah.
Right, right.
No, that makes a lot of sense. So how do we, I mean, especially because lately there's been a lot of like news on like men and young men and men losing their footing in society. I mean, the thing is, we've been saying this a lot about for years about black men, right? Like it's
Hmm.
like we've always known, and it's not like because black men are not trying, black men have always tried, but the way in which society is, like when we talk about, I always say this, when people go, "Oh, I want a breadwinner, I want my partner to be a provider," and they're telling me, "Oh, I'm looking for a black man to marry," right? I'm like, that's great. But then when we look at the employment status, right? Especially the unemployment status of like black men, it's
Hmm.
always double the national, right? The national unemployment rate. When we even think about, even when black men have the degree, they have the pay, it's usually not commensurate to the degree and their experience, right? So when I'm talking because I do a lot of work with dating and all that stuff, right? So when people go, I want a black man that is a provider and he needs to pay for everything, I'm usually asking those women to be realistic. Or when men internalize this message of I need to be paying for everything, I ask them to be realistic as well, right? In terms of like, really, like that's a lot of burden that you're putting on yourself, given that we know that in society, sometimes it's just really difficult for Black men to be able to achieve financially what they desire and what they are capable of. Not because they can't do it, but because of racism that we've experienced in society. And now it seems like the rest of the races are catching up to this, right? This is affecting all men now. And
Right.
so there's this whole thing that people are like, oh, men are losing their footing in society. Well, how do we help men? How do we help and support men? I know that's a big question I'm asking you.
Big question, but a great question. I think it's having more conversations like this, right? I think it's um, allowing men to be vulnerable, however that may look like, and
Right.
giving them that space to say it's okay, right? Going
Mhm.
back to what I was saying of it's okay to say that you're afraid and you don't know how to do something and just asking for help and being brave at being, have the courage to be brave at being bad at something, like it's the
Mhm.
first
Mhm.
time expressing emotions doesn't have to be right, right?
Mhm.
And again, it's playing into that narrative of if I do this, then it has to look like this,
Mhm.
rather than if I do this, I will figure it out along the way, right?
Mhm.
One thing I
Mhm.
always say to my clients is not every problem needs a solution. It's not everything that we have to fix. Maybe
Right.
it's navigating through these um, through these problems, through these issues, and figuring out where's my place
Right.
and understand that maybe this is my role for now, right?
Right.
If it's with
Right.
my partner, having that open conversation of this is how it's going to look and how we're going to move, and not
Mhm.
living in those standardized roles of this is me, and if I
Mhm.
perform less than that, then it's like, oh my gosh, what?
Mhm.
And you're suffering by yourself, not understanding
Right.
that hey, I need help, right? And
Right.
yeah,
Yeah, no, that's important. I really like that because also it's not just like with a partner. It can also be with your other male friends, right?
right, right.
With other guys, like I need help, right? I can't be the only one doing this or trying to figure this out. I need help to help me figure this out. It can be with your siblings, it can be with your friends, it can be with other family members, right? Being able to say, hey, this burden is too much. I need somebody to help me with it.
Right.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Do you
I
have?
find it.
Uh-huh.
Oh yes, no, it's interesting because um, it's interesting because as I mentioned before, let's say black women in particular, they
Hmm.
are, from what I understand, they are going to college more. They're
Hmm.
Hmm.
increasing, of course, their schooling, their education, which is going to increase their net worth and how
Hmm.
much money they make. So when they
Hmm.
are looking for men, it's like, I want somebody on my level.
Right.
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 Okay. So
Right.
then they have to deal with that. But then they also want a man to respect them for their accomplishments
Hmm.
and what they bring to the table.
Hmm.
So I think it's very interesting where you almost have like this clash of ideas that
Hmm.
men sometimes have to be able to, manage when they are going out dating. And
Mm.
when you have a woman saying, "Okay, I want you to provide for me, but I don't need you because I can provide for myself,"
Yeah.
and so I try to think of it like this: if women want the men to change how they are seen and accept them for what they are able to accomplish,
Hmm.
then it's almost like women have to also accept men for perhaps their worth and what they have not accomplished.
Hmm.
If it is not up to that same level, because it doesn't mean they're not trying. It does not mean that, that they are necessarily, once again, tied to their work or
Hmm.
tied to their financial position, that
Hmm.
they do have something else to offer. And
Right.
that typically women also want them to be able to offer that. But then, if they don't live up to what a quote unquote real man is, then your worth is kind of diminished and
Yeah.
your ability to even get your foot in the door to be like, oh, but I am more than this.
Right.
I do have other things to offer.
Right.
Then, your chances are kind of diminished.
Right.
So I think when it comes to establishing their footing, they have to reestablish somewhat where they place their feet. It's not just gaining your balance, but you have to place your feet in areas that you may not have placed them in before because you're
Hmm.
trying to redefine who you are as a man, not only to yourself and to the world at large, but also to potential romantic partners.
Right, right. No, that's a great point. I feel like we need to have a whole different let's talk series on like dating, right? Heterosexual
Mm-hmm.
dating in general in this case, but then we can talk about it largely in terms of dating. But no, you're right, because I think what you're speaking to is how it's not just men that have internalized this message around men being the provider and just having that identity and that role. Women have bought into it too, right?
Right.
And
Right.
women have also bought into it that even though women are like, I have my own money, I can take care of myself, there's still this unspoken expectation that the man needs to be the provider, right? And also, I mean, we can go into history with all of this, right? For Black women, also, given because of the history, Black women have to take care of the family, right? Not because the Black men can't do it. So there's that like struggle between like Black men and women trying to really deal with this reality they've been dealt with to really be able to balance like, how do I do this together? I think that's the issue. How do we balance it together rather than how do I do it individually and fulfill this role as the provider and also have this unspoken expectation that you're going to be the provider. And so it creates a lot of pressure. So that sounds like another topic that we can actually focus on by itself. So thanks, Neil, for bringing that up. I
No
want to
problem.
thank, yeah, I want to thank the both of you for just really engaging in this conversation with us. Any additional thing you want to add before we end?
I think we have to do this again because there's a lot we didn't cover.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. This was great. This was great.
Okay, so we definitely had to do it again. And so
Mm-hmm.
we want the people who are listening to us, right? This is the type of work that we do. So if there are any men out there who are like, hey, I need to just test this out. I need to come to therapy because I'm stressing out. emotionally because of this high burden and pressure that I'm carrying for being a provider, or any other mental, emotional, or relational difficulties that you might be having, we are certainly here to help you out at Ibisame Relational Health. So feel free to book a free 15 minutes phone consultation with us, and you'll be able to work with either one of these men, Neil Mitchell and Joseph Murdo. We thank you all for listening to us, and we'll see you next time at Let's Talk Therapy.